House will come to order. Representative?
Yes, the answer would be no. The only things that are limited in this bill would be due to virtual schools, which would be a plan to conduct school-sponsored optional educational events at least 6 times per year at locations selected to provide convenient access to students enrolled in the school who want to participate, a plan to conduct meetings at least twice between teachers and students enrolled in school, either in person or through the conference calls, but they can use technology, and a plan to provide opportunities for face-to-face meeting with teachers enrolled in school at least 6 times per year. And that is just towards vaccinations. Virtual schools.
Thank you, Representative. Representative, another question?
Yeah, Madam Speaker, to the bill.
To the bill.
Colleagues, I rise in opposition to House Bill 3063. To many of my constituents, House Bill 3063 is considered an assault on personal freedoms, personal choice, and parental rights. They hear a lot about my body, my choice, personal freedoms, and how we identify, preferred pronouns, etc., and yet the opening sentence of House Bill 3036 says it removes the ability of a parent to decline required immunizations. No freedom for parents and for their choices for their children. No ability for these children to attend a public school function, let alone school, even though the law requires children to attend school. In 1983, 24 doses of vaccines were required. In 2018, 76 doses were required for a student to attend school, a 300% increase in 35 years. We're not talking about just a few vaccines, 300%. How many remember the unintended consequences of thalidomide in the 1950s and the 10,000 or more children that were born with severe and debilitating malformations? Is the state of Oregon, through this legislation, ready to remove parental rights, parental freedoms, the freedom of religious convictions, and the freedom of children to receive a public education? If so, what will be the next freedom to be removed in the name of preservation of the public peace, health, and safety as stated in the closing sentence of this bill? This bill, to many of my constituents, invokes fear and coercion. There have been 14 cases of measles in Oregon out of 4.2 million people. And so this bill is declared an emergency, effective on its passage, and yet it allows compliance to be extended into 2020. Is it really an emergency? Or is there concern of a referendum from the citizens of the state declaring their rights and freedoms over their children's health and what will be injected into their bodies? If a child is immunized, then they are not at risk from those who are not immunized. Is that correct? Only those who are not immunized would be at risk. If a parent chooses to make that decision, then they are the ones responsible for their children. As we have heard in emails, phone calls, testimonies, personal visits from many around the state, these children are not the state's property. They are the responsibility of the parents. The most recent cases of measles in Washington have been tracked to a Canadian who traveled to the U.S. and had not been immunized. Should we close our borders to protect our citizens from foreigners who might carry these diseases? Can adults transmit measles and other diseases? Of course they can, and yet this bill does nothing to address that. How are we going to identify adults who are not in compliance with the immunization standards when they want to attend a public school event? Again, parents in my district see House Bill 3063 as an assault on their personal freedoms, their personal choice, and their parental rights. This bill is giving the Oregon Health Authority, an appointed board with no legislative oversight, the authority to adopt rules to establish a list of diseases that pose a threat to public health. And what are the criteria? What medical advice is required prior to listing a vaccine as mandatory? And what oversight is there on this agency? None is specified in the bill, and that is a very dangerous precedent. Can virtual schools handle the influx of the 60,000 students soon to be displaced by this bill? No, as stated by the superintendent of Baker Charter Schools, currently only 3% of any district can attend a virtual charter school. That's 3%. That 3% is a total of less than 18,000. And currently, 10,000 student positions are already being filled, leaving less than 8,000 spaces available. What happens to the other 52,000 students? Is it also true that in Section 13, lines 16 through 32 of House Bill 3427 that just passed the floor last week, that it cuts grant funding for virtual public charter schools? And how will this help parents? What happens to the single parent who can no longer use a daycare facility or place their children in public school and yet have a personal conviction as to the health of their children? This will affect those of low socioeconomic resources the hardest and those who already have some of the highest dropout rates in the state.
Excuse me, Representative. Representative Brock-Smith yields his time. Please continue.
Thank you, Representative. Are we really going to force these parents into making a choice of their children's health over financial survival? And what about freedom of choice for parents and their children? The requirements of strict medical exemptions, which has gone from 3 to 7, intimidating at the very least and unreasonable for most physicians and parents. The -53 amendment adds 4 more requirements for a medical exemption. To summarize, the changes in the -53 affect only the process of obtaining medical exemptions and does not change the standard by which medical exemptions are to be evaluated for compliance with the ACIP guidelines. Medical exemptions actually become more burdensome as permanent exemptions will no longer be accepted, and all medical exemptions will need to be resubmitted and reviewed on an annual basis. For many parents across all party lines, they see House Bill 3063 as a true assault on their personal freedoms, their personal choice, and their personal rights. Parents have the right to be concerned. Colleagues, I urge a no vote on House Bill 3063. Parental rights, religious freedoms, and children's rights to a public education must be preserved. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Representative. Further discussion.